And good afternoon. Welcome to the Babbers. This is JK here on a lovely Monday afternoon. Fabulous weather out there, nice and warm. I was outside in my t-shirt just now. Fantastic. And today we're going to be talking to three lovely people that I know about mindfulness, because one of the things that's happening at the moment with all this discussions that we're getting about mental health and everything on all the media is the NHS is pushing it as well, and it is one of the things that turns up almost straight away is use mindfulness. But what is mindfulness? Now, one of the things that I found this morning when I was looking through again on Google is the various definitions, and they're all different. And certainly I get confused. Definition according to Psychology Today, which is one of the major journals: state of active, open attention to the present. You observe your thoughts and feelings from a distance without judging them, good or bad. Judging your own feelings, your own thoughts. And so today we've got three gentlemen, Alan, Bob and Miro, who will introduce themselves in a moment. Alan, could you just say who you are and what you know about mindfulness, please?
Yes, thanks, JK. My name's Alan Kellas. I've worked as a psychiatrist in the NHS. I've worked outside of the NHS in various different settings. My interest in mindfulness is primarily just my own experience of having come across meditation as a practice some years ago for the last few decades. And I just find it an enormously useful resource for myself. But professionally, I've had some experience of trying to help other people find tools and ways of practicing being still, using their breath, using relaxation and mindful practices. But particularly, I guess my main experience has been helping people with learning difficulties, maybe in quite severe states of mental distress. And I've got a particular interest also in how nature can help us in our practices. Okay, thank you. And Miro, how do you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you for inviting me. Miro Cansky. I'm originally from the Czech Republic, and I've been living here for 10 years in Bristol. My interest in meditation stems 20 years back when I started meditating myself, and that was in a Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And about 7 years ago, I heard about this, at that time, quite new thing, mindfulness. And I realized this is pretty much what I've been doing in the Buddhist tradition, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. But here it's stripped of the religious words, and the essence, however, seemed to be very much there. So I was very interested in training in that as well. And then since then, I've been sharing it with a wide variety of different people and organizations. So obviously very useful for my own life. By the way, I'm using it right now as I sit here because it's really useful when one is under a little bit of pressure, like we are now, to actually put one's 2 feet on the floor and notice one's breathing. So from that point of view, I think mindfulness is something extremely practical that can be used in every single moment.
That's very true, actually, your comment about using it here. We haven't met before, and one of the techniques that I use long term is to go and be up a mountain, halfway up a mountain in Norway with nobody around. This is really outside my comfort zone, being in a studio like this, especially meeting new people. And Bob, could you just say who you are and what you know about this mindfulness?
Hello, yeah, I'm Bob Fisher. I work in private practice as a psychological therapist and counsellor, and I work in some organisational settings as well. Mindfulness. I'm much with JK. You hear different versions of it, but for me, it's just about being aware of what's going on for yourself, having some kind of inner narrative with yourself, and having a physical awareness of whether you're carrying tensions unnecessarily, and where you are emotionally. Are you carrying some concerns? And being able to have that self-talk so that you can kind of be able to perhaps share it with other people. But I just find so many of us go through life without actually thinking about where we are and how we're feeling physically and emotionally. And I think it's a really, really helpful tool.
One of the things that I was doing when I was looking this up, and I am deliberately leaving our fourth guest to catch her breath after she's just arrived in the studio, is one of the things that I came across when I was doing the research for this show is the questionnaires that you can do online. The 5-facet questionnaire, a better way to measure mindfulness, which again is coming from fairly central journals and things like that. Alan, I know that you're very interested in kind of using non-technical ways of doing things like questionnaires in general. I haven't really come across you using that type of thing. What would you think about somebody saying, oh, I've got to understand my own mindfulness, I need to go and do the short form, which is only 24 questions, or the long form, which is 48 questions about do you think about your own thoughts type questions. What's your opinion about doing things like this online?
I'm afraid I've got very little experience of it, JK. I think there may be others in the room who could answer that more than me. What I would say, though, is that what's really important, I think, for anyone learning or starting any new skill is just to start with what you've already done. I mean, certainly if someone comes to me and we're exploring, well, what might work for you, what's important is to try to get some idea of what they have done in their life before. What are the times, for example, when they feel most still? What are the times that they feel most at ease with themselves? And that can give you a clue as to the sort of things that might be useful as a start off.
Yeah. And Miro, do you use this type of thing at all, these questionnaires or anything like that?
No, even though I'm aware of them, and I find that they are useful in a particular context. I think somehow I'm observing that in our society we have this, or have had for quite a while, this religion, we could call it, of science, and that we trust more in something that's measurable. And if it has a number attached to it, to many people this gives us a sign that that's something reliable. So I think from that point of view, actually being able to measure one's ability to be mindful and then maybe compare it with the time after attending a mindfulness course and seeing an increase might be really useful. So I can see the usefulness of that. However, there is one thing I would like to add to that. I think it's important to distinguish between the word mindfulness as it's used, because in two different ways. Mindfulness is both a process of what we are doing, but it's also a state of mind. And those two things are slightly different. It's what we do, and then also it's the result. And I think that brings a little bit of confusion. So I think what's measured there in those questionnaires is not so much whether we do it right, but what the state of the mind is in general in the moment. And I think it's useful to maybe to see the difference between the practice and its effect. Those are two different things.
Yeah. Okay. Bob, what's your opinion of this type of measuring?
Well, I'm usually of the opinion, and if it's helpful, that's fine. I think I think if you start number crunching with it starts to lose its purpose, and it's about holding on to a sense of self and awareness. I mean, a good example of not doing it, and I've seen this often, is my own family and others who become ill as they're approaching some annual leave and a holiday, and that happens time and time again. And it appears to me that they haven't been listening to their bodies or their state of mind. And as the pressure goes off work, all of a sudden the work levels drop, and they start being aware then of they're carrying too many tensions and too many stresses, and they become ill just before their annual leave. And I think that's a classic example of not being mindful and aware of what's going on for you.
Yeah, it's very true. Okay, and we've been joined by our fourth guest in the studio here today, Josie, who's just kind of recovered her breath. I'd just like to introduce yourself and what you know about mindfulness, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Josie Roberts. What do I know about mindfulness? Mostly, it's something that is just part of my life. It's become part of my life over the years without having a title, just becoming more aware of what I was doing and being in my body at any one time and being aware of my surroundings. I try and share that with people. I work for a corporation. I work with customers with complex needs. So I'm, within my work, constantly trying to encourage my customers to connect with where they are right now and not think ahead and not think behind, but just, if we're doing gardening, to be aware of the soil on their hands or the rain in their hair or lighting a fire or just being in the present moment. I think it's really important to connect with your surroundings and where you are.
Right, okay, thank you, Josie. And we're coming up to an ad break in a minute, and then we'll be going back into this after the ad break. And we're talking about mindfulness, and I'm just looking at some of the questions on this questionnaire that I looked at. And the fact that personally I don't really like my emotions and feelings being measured because they change quite rapidly according to what's happening around me. As we were coming down to the studio just now, somebody mentioned something about the refugee situation in Syria. Made me think of something quite bad, in my opinion. So we're across to the ads now. Welcome back to the Babbers. You're talking to JK here, talking to Alan, Bob, Miro and Josie about mindfulness and what we all mean about it. We've just been discussing the questionnaire, and in general it's useful for measuring things, possibly for proving results and things like that. And it has drifted across in another article I found, being used for children with emotional, mental and behavioural problems, which is possibly taking it to a bit of an extreme thing. Now, Josie, you were talking about using mindfulness, and you just kind of, in a way, you kind of used it underneath a different way of describing it, possibly, or even a way of using the word mindfulness, because I've only come across it relatively recently as a way of studying and using it as a technique for yourself. You were saying you're kind of using it in gardening and things like that. What kind of thing are you trying to say there?
Well, when you're outdoors and you're working, if you're working on a gardening project, say particularly, you can enjoy the moment and you can get involved with the moment. So enjoy what you're doing, enjoy the people that are around you, the thoughts in your head, the weather as it is, the soil in your hands, or you could be thinking, I'm only planting this because I want a crop at some point. So it's just connecting with the moment and enjoying what you're doing as you do it, instead of looking ahead for what the outcome might be or looking for why you did it. Just being aware of your surroundings and who you're with and what you're doing, how you're feeling, connecting with the now.
And Miro, when you're doing this, do you actually kind of teach this as a technique to people in the ways, or do you just kind of hint at what they should be doing and let them discover it for themselves?
The course, which is the most common way of learning mindfulness, even though nowadays you can buy a book and take yourself through an 8-week course, so it's really quite varied how people can learn mindfulness. But there is a mixture of methods, which all are pretty much the same, and they all open people to the possibility of appreciating, as Josie said, what's going on right now, beyond the judgment of whether it's good enough or not, or where it might lead. So the interesting thing is you can't explain what mindfulness is fully. Yeah. That's one of the frustrations, but also the good things. Because if you could describe it, it would mean it's based on some kind of theory, but it's based in the experience. And so all theories about mindfulness will eventually come to a place where we have to realize, guys, it's time to go and practice. We can't actually talk about it anymore. So your question, do I explain it or do I let them find it for themselves? It's kind of both. There is invitation into the process, but then the rest is for them to find out. And that's why reading a book about mindfulness and understanding the theory is incomparable to the actual experience of mindfulness. That's, I think, the essence.
Yeah, I think of it as rather like slowing down in my own thought processes to the point where I can start doing this, connecting with nature and gardening, or being up in Lee Woods and being lucky enough to see a deer or something like that. I am very much in the moment. And Bob, that's one of the things that you've used as a description in the past is how would you describe it in that sense as the concept to somebody?
I suppose there's lots of different versions of mindfulness, and I heard something helpful the other day, and it went something like, it's not so much about meditating and emptying your mind, but the first step is being aware of what's going on in your mind, and then you can decide whether you want to empty it or and go somewhere else in your mind. But it's some kind of emotional self-determination, perhaps, for some people. And I think, as we said earlier on, for me, this is about giving people clues and tools about what it might mean for them.
Alan, have you got anything to say on that basis?
Well, the basic point about trying to live in the moment, encouraging us just to reflect on how much of our minds are preoccupied by worries about the future, anticipations about the future, or regret or guilt about the past. That when we think about that, then we can see that it makes sense to live more fully in the moment. That's what we've got. And then I guess for me the techniques that can be really useful are based on our senses, so seeing and looking and feeling and touching, maybe moving and just becoming aware then of breath. So those are ways of becoming more aware of what is happening in the moment, which often we take for granted. And yes, that spirit of curiosity, but also gratitude, just to be focused on what we've got rather than be thinking about something else somewhere else.
And Josie, I can see that you're ready to say something there.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about when you're thinking mindfully, I guess, because that's the title we're giving it today. It's the difference between, like, it's easy to get from A to B in your head, whether that's preparing a meal, walking somewhere, the way you react to other people, the way that you do many, many things. It's easy to get to A to B because that's the way we're programmed. It becomes second nature to follow a certain series of events. And I guess mindfulness is about kind of taking the shortcut or a different way and having a look at different scenery as well, rather than constantly just going from A to B and A to B. You kind of unlearn because you're doing these things because that's what we've always done. That's the way we've always done it. And to stop at A and think, okay, how am I going to get to B this time? Means that you're choosing to do it for yourself. It's not a learnt process. It's not just following patterns. It's not doing something that you were trained to do, or you make the conscious decision of how you're going to travel, whichever experience it is, whatever activity you're taking part in. I'm at A, how do I get to B? And noting how you get to B and seeing if that when you're paying any attention to it, it's actually any easier or different from how you might have done it before.
Yeah, I find that in my current life, this Easter, shall we say, I have 4 different roles, and I very easily multi-track between the 4 roles at the same time and end up trying to think about far too much, including a spreadsheet that's got 1,300 entries on it at the same time as I'm talking to you now, or doing some gardening and everything else. And I think it's this kind of anxiety thing that probably will affect a lot of people. 1 in 4 of us do have issues at the moment to do with mental health. And that anxiety one is really high up there. And I think this is one of the ways that we can approach it, which is why I wanted to do this program, is the ways that nationally we're using one particular word for many different techniques, some of which are very, very old indeed. And Alan, I can see you nodding there. Can you just make a comment about that kind of anxiety kind of type of thing with most people affected in work and private lives?
Well, just to say that it's very common, I'd certainly echo that. I think a lot of people do struggle with trying to find some stillness in their own minds and in their own feeling. Worry is both contagious but also very common, isn't it? I mean, I think it's just part of life that it makes sense to learn skills of being able to switch off a bit, being able to be still. Whatever tools one can find to do that are very, very important, because otherwise our minds can just run away with us completely. And what we're talking about is techniques and tools of gaining a bit more control. I think we all know that 6 months after an event we can look back and we've got a bit of distance, and we all wish sometimes that we could gain that distance in the moment. That's another way of talking about what we're discussing today. How can we gain a little bit of distance so that we're not so gripped by the dramas of our projects and daily life?
One of the things that I do in a very quick kind of way is count to 10.
Yep.
Would you say that that's a valid technique? Just that very, very brief, just slow down that little bit if you haven't got time to look.
I would have thought so. It helps an awful lot of people. Even just getting to 10 is quite difficult, to be honest. Counting to 3 can be a big achievement, particularly if you're in a state of anger or in a state of extreme emotion. Just to have a little bit of a distance can be a big achievement. Just a bit of a gap between the feeling, the thought, and then the reaction.
And Bob, what do you think about having that kind of very quick technique?
I think it's very important. It's a really good discipline for people, especially in difficult situations where there's a stressful situation at work, or just giving oneself enough time to step out of the knee-jerk reaction that comes up for most of us in a difficult situation, and stand back a bit. And that is literally being in that present moment. And that gives you time to explore what options are available and to actually exercise conscious choice rather than reacting to a situation, which is really important.
Miro, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm very much in agreement with what I've heard. And I mean, the interesting thing that's happening in that space between an experience and our reaction is that we color everything that happens with the type of reaction we bring. So here I think mindfulness can bring this sense of kindness and friendliness, which is we haven't mentioned yet, even though I see people nodding here, because that's almost so self-explanatory that we didn't need to mention. Yet I think we need to mention that, because the only way we can actually create, that's my experience personal, that gap, is that we stop temporarily disliking that experience. If we dislike it, we will react to it very strongly. If we allow a little bit of openness and friendliness, even if it's uncomfortable, interest, warmth, that allows for the gap to appear actually. So I think that's quite useful to remind ourselves of.
Yeah, that's interesting. Josie, have you got anything to say about this kind of idea about just very briefly stopping, this counting to 10, or some technique you use? Or
yeah, definitely helpful. I can only mirror what everyone else has said there. I have my own technique, which is to visualize feelings as a color and an object. I find that is really, really helpful. I mean, that's just for me personally. So if I have an uncomfortable feeling, it has to have a shape and a color really quickly, because I can deal with it if it's physical, if it's given a form, I can look at it objectively, whereas when it's my feeling, it's part of me. So I separate it. Say a nice easy one, jealousy, it would be green and spiky. Once I can see something green and spiky, I find it a lot easier to deal with and get rid of than feeling an emotion that's wrapped up in myself. It's like by giving it a colour and a shape, it takes it away from me slightly. So that's my own personal. But yeah, counting to 10's another one, really, really good, particularly if you're angry.
Yeah, we're coming up to the news in a moment, and this is kind of quite an interesting way of looking at it, because certainly I've been told various different ways of it. So across the news and back in a few minutes. And now we're going back to some various bits and pieces to do with mindfulness. And we were discussing this short-term technique of counting to 10, which I use quite a lot. I was talking to a lovely man that I know that is very close to living on the street, and he's doing really well at the moment because he's learnt this technique at the grand old age of, let's say, mid-40s. He's been constant problems with gentlemen in uniform over the years because he just instantly reacted to slights that he was perceived slights to him, and he now kind of counts a little bit, and it's really doing him a lot of good. And thinking longer term about how you might learn this living in the moment thing. Alan, I know you use certain techniques to do with being in nature. Can you just talk a little bit more about how somebody might be able to do that on their own, or maybe in a very small group of trusted friends?
Yep. One of my experiences of mindfulness and the discussions around it is that people can think that it's a very mindy practice and it's to do with our minds. One of the things that can help is for people to start connecting with their bodies, that it's not just a mind practice. So breath is, for example, just the first way of connecting it, just being able to notice our breath as it comes in, as it goes out. Another very common practice is using our senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, feeling. So as we connect more with our bodies, then it's a natural next step that our environment can either support us or make it harder to make those connections. And for many people, having a sit spot, a favourite place, perhaps as simple as a good view, maybe just looking at a plant, connecting with something natural, listening to bird song, something in the natural world. Josie was describing just the experience of the feeling of soil on your hands. So for many people, there are particular experiences of nature, often associated with our senses, that reconnect us to our body. In simple terms, both for children and for people of all ages, finding a special place to sit can often be a good start. Taking kids into natural environments and making a game of finding a magic spot. These are simple techniques of just having the courage just to spend a few moments on your own in nature. Can be scary if people have never done it, but can also be incredibly exciting when people get all of the messages and the insights that can come from that as a simple practice.
Thank you, Alan. And Bob, what would you say in that same kind of vein?
If I'm trying to get somebody to practice and understand a mindfulness concept, I'd be asking them to sit in a chair with both feet flat on the ground, grounded, centered, and as Alan said, observe their breathing, and not so much empty their mind, but just to get in a sense of being gentle with themselves and gentle with the world, and letting it happen rather than trying to make it happen. Because I think if you can get into that mind state of being gentle and grounded and observing your breathing, you can drop into another state of being and just let things flow from there.
And Miro, we were talking about state of being there, which is more towards the meditation side, but have you got anything along the same ideas of the vein about how you would approach it slightly longer term? Count to 10 is the very immediate way of doing it, but slightly longer term.
Do you mean longer practices?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, the interesting thing is that there are all those different ways of approaching it, from very short practices to the possibility of some people exploring meditations of 1 hour long. So it all depends on what we find useful. As people, that's my experience, as people go through the process, they realize that everything in the day, including walking to the toilet, including sending an email, can be actually a mindfulness practice. And that's the interesting thing, that whatever we do with full awareness of what's going on can actually be a practice. So the variety of using the whole world as a mindfulness friend in a way is really there. And yet, those formal practices where we put a CD on or where we have a guided practice are extremely important at the beginning, before we realize that it's out there as well, and we can use every single experience for that.
Okay, thank you. And just coming to you, Josie, I know that when you're at work, which is quite a long day in itself, you do have times where you need to have a slight break. What type of technique do you use? Counting to 10 is the very quick way that you can do it in a bad situation or a situation where you do need to kind of temporarily distance yourself. What would you say, kind of like you want to do it quickly at work? What would you do?
Just take myself off, sit down, usually outdoors, rather than in my office. I move around a lot anyway, so yeah, it'd generally be just sitting quietly by myself for like 5 minutes, catching myself, and then going back in to deal with what I have to.
And you do have the flexibility in your role of being actually able to do that. Going back to you, Miro, one of the things that you do work is with groups of possibly employees or something like that. How do you get over this? How do you get it so that one person can justify to the others that do need a break off work? I used to work at Orange as a call centre, and or on a production line where I work making hyperdynamic news. The concept in either job of actually taking a break for yourself would have almost been a fireable offence. What would you say about that kind of situation?
Yes, a very good point of the culture. The culture in the place where we bring mindfulness to is extremely important to acknowledge, because mindfulness can appear to be extremely countercultural to certain spaces. I heard or read somewhere of an organization, and okay, it's different. It's somewhere in LA, on the beach, modern organization, and they apparently have a wall alongside the corridor with surf boards, and every employee at any point in the day can take the surfboard and go and do some surfing. And surprisingly, they realized it boosted the productivity and creativity to an extreme, by an extreme level. And so the fear that people will just get lazy, they will take advantage of it, was unfounded. Now, I like that story because it kind of shows us that fear we have of, if I stop, everything will go wrong. I must never stop. That actually is a thought rather than the reality, that if we check it out, most people realize, now that I paused, I'm much more productive. Thank you. It was really good to stop. But the fear of stopping is so all-pervasive. It's really all-pervasive.
Bob, have you got anything to say about that? I mean...
Yes, and what was being said earlier on is really interesting in as much as making mindfulness something on a day, on everything we do, bringing a mindfulness practice. And it made me realise just how much we do that is not mindful. How many times I've driven a journey from work to home and remembered absolutely nothing from that journey at all. And we've been in some kind of, I think it's flow state, I think it's called, where our brain's on automatic pilot and we're somewhere else completely thinking about the future or the past and anxieties. So I just think it's such good practice to try and draw this into our lives.
Alan?
Yeah, I guess another scenario to talk about is just family, parenting responsibilities, caring responsibilities. Lots of people are very, very preoccupied with just managing chaotic family, kids, or might have serious responsibilities in caring for an elderly relative. And the value for them, particularly where they might otherwise be completely preoccupied with other people's needs, to have time for themselves, just a few minutes, to calm down and to consider the benefit for kids as well. Lots of families that I know find the simple suggestion of trying to have a moment before you dive into your meal, 8 small moments just of stopping There are ways of introducing simple mindfulness practices that kids really love. They're all worth trying, I think.
I totally agree on that. With my children, sometimes we kind of run around like mad things, especially when they're, let's say, about 5-7 years old, something like that. And we suddenly think, oh, wait a second, let's just stop. And I would deliberately introduce something like go and look at a butterfly, watch one come past, and suddenly they would slow down. So we're going across to some ad breaks now. I'll be back in a moment. The Babbers. We're going to spend the last few minutes just discussing how you can actually find some way of actually approaching mindfulness and finding out a way of doing it. Alan, can you just kind of give a pointer about where somebody might be able to find more information on this?
Well, quite a lot of health centres do have information about it. Some health centres have social prescribing coordinators or community links. So if you go to your health centre and you could ask around what contacts do they have. There's an organisation Well Aware, if people are on the website, have information about resources. Organisations like Mind, Googling can put you in touch with local groups and teachers who might be running mindfulness courses. And asking around. There's nothing like personal recommendation.
Bob, have you got any pointers on that?
Only the Mind thing. I think they will have something there and have a connection there. I mean, if somebody is computer literate, there is a huge amount on the net, and lots of different versions of it. So that gives somebody a flavour of it. But I think actually doing a course and doing it with other people has a social dynamic to it as well, and a shared experience with other people. So finding some kind of course that you would do with other people, I think, would have an added value to it.
And Miro?
Yeah, I can echo that. Respecting the variety of people's approaches to things. There are people who find it anxiety-provoking to think of sitting with other people in a room, and for them, maybe starting with a book. There are so many very good books nowadays that take you through the 8-week course with a CD. I talk to people, it often inspires them. The interesting thing is they usually find it limiting around the session 5-6. They realize that the support of the group and a teacher where they can actually ask a question is something they would like, but it's a very good starting point. So I would suggest books, definitely YouTube, some videos. There is so much available for free now. And then if people want to explore it further and actually do an 8-week course, then is it okay if I mention my website? There is information. So it's www.mindfulness for all, that's number 4all.co.uk. And there is both information about what mindfulness is, and people can contact me through that if they have more questions about mindfulness.
Okay, thank you, Miro. And Josie, do you have any pointers as to where people might... Have you come across any, in either professional or privately?
Yeah, echoing what Alan said, there's a lot that's free through health services. It's been prescribed a lot more. Also, looking in local press and community centres, you'll generally see a course of mindfulness, generally low cost, concession or free. There'll be some sort of course up in most of the local community centres. It's something that is a lot more accessible these days.
Okay, thank you. And I actually came across it either via my workplace when I worked for a large corporation. They had their own helpline, and they put me in contact with their own internal therapist. And then also an organisation which was called Lift, but might have changed its name recently, but I'm not sure about it. It's still Lift. If you ask about them, they can put you in touch with some wonderful people locally.